All right, so I'm going to add my new function here. I'm going to call it squash and stretch. I'm just going to give it a return true. This isn't doing anything yet. And before I get into this logic, I actually want to set up a debug mechanism so that I can actually show this logic as it's being built up. Because although I know what I'm going to type here, because I've done this a couple times in order to prepare for these videos, in real life, when you're building out your logic, you're discovering, you're debugging, you're trying to figure it out. You're not going to just type in the final solution the first time. It just doesn't work that way. And so what I'm trying to show here, while at the same time trying to show the logic that's required here to do squash and stretch, the major point of these videos is to show you different techniques that you can use to understand the APIs and debug your logic as you build it. And so that's what I want to do here is I'm going to create a debug section here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new transform object, and it will show up as a new joint in our graph to use for debugging purposes, okay? And so I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call this T and equals graph dot add node. And in this particular case, add node takes, and I'm just going to give it a name. And then in this particular case, I'm going to call it look at joint. And it is a transform, and again, case and spelling matters. It's a transform object, okay? And so what this will start to do is I've now added a new node to my graph. Now, what's interesting is if you start to look at this, what we're seeing here in the network node is the script literally, or the network, the visualized graphs and nodes driven right out of this graph or this code. Okay. If you go to the where it's actually injected into the final graph, you'll start to see the final graph looks like this, and see how things are kind of sitting on top of each other because I just added this look at joint. That node was built with this script logic here. This is it's kind of meta. You're creating this graph add node object here. And if you look at the parameters, the name of it is look at joint, and the callback or the type is called transform object. And when this is actually incorporated into the actual network graph, it shows up like this. It's named look at, and it's called the transform object, okay? But every time I come back to it, it's like this. This is why I set up that layout graph before. So when you select the layout graph, if you increase this, see how it's just laying out the graph? So it's not sitting on top of each other. It's just a little easier to see the final graph being built up that way when you're looking at it like this. Okay, another hot tip. All right, so I've added that guy, which is great. Now, in order for us to actually see and manipulate this new joint that I created, you need to promote basically this see this transform. That needs to get promoted into the parms node. And the way you do that in Apex script is you say t.t underbar in dot promote, and I'm going to give it the name that I want to use. So this is a look at, let's go look at joint. And yeah, that should do it. So I hit save, and see that it immediately showed up as look at joint in the graph. Okay, so now if I come back over here, you should be able to see look at joint in the graph. And you'll see that it's actually showing up right at the base at 0, 0.